Thank you for joining us today for our second seminar celebrating the University of Waterloo's 50th anniversary. I'd like to welcome our webcast viewers, and as well we welcome Ontario Telehealth Network sites. We're very excited to be part of the broadcast to OTN sites, and we thank Tanberg for making this possible. We're very new to this, so please bear with us if we have any glitches today. This seminar is being recorded and is being broadcast over the web. We ask that you hold your questions to after the seminar presentation so that we can get a real or virtual mic to you so you can ask your questions. A very warm welcome to our guest speaker, Dr. Vimla Patel. Dr. Patel is a professor in the departments of biomedical informatics and psychiatry at Columbia University. A special thank you to our seminar sponsors, Borden Ladner Gervais, McKesson, Healthcare Information Management and Communications Canada, and Smart Systems for Health Agency. This is the second seminar of the Why Not series in the Smarter Health Seminars. The 50th anniversary theme is Why Not? And these seminars are dedicated to this theme and will explore different why not questions related to health informatics ideas and innovations. It will look at questions such as, why not use the promise of information and communications technologies to improve health and healthcare systems in Canada? Following Vimla, we continue with a cast of stars who will be part of the series, including Mr. Tom Clausen, Senator Michael Kirby, Dr. Brian Haynes, Dr. Jeff Fong, and Dr. Octo Barnett. Our agenda today is as follows. Dominic Covey, Founding Director of the Waterloo Institute for Health Informatics Research, will introduce our speaker. Vimla will speak for about 40-45 minutes. We ask you to hold your questions, as I said, to after her presentation. And then if you have a question, please signal to either Dominic or myself, and we'll get the mic to you. We invite questions from our web and teleconference viewers at that time. So without any further ado, Dominic, will you please introduce our speaker?
Well, good afternoon and welcome, Vimla. It's good to have you here. I thought yesterday with the snow and the fog and things that she might have trouble, but she had an absolutely clean flight in and beautiful weather today, and it was arranged by the Chamber of Commerce, I believe, so that you would think this was a great place to be. There's so many things I could say about Vimla. In the little handout, things like that. She's a member of the American College of Medical Informatics. She's was Swedish Woman of Science Award in 1999, Honorary Doctor of Science from the University of Victoria, many other honors that it's amazing her life. She's a good friend of David Johnson, who joined us for lunch today, and they rallied back to old times and all the different things that they know about. Probably the thing I know the most about Vimla, besides her research since the time, is the program that she set up at McGill. And being in Quebec, it was a kind of a quiet program, to the rest of Canada. But when you look at publications in the field, it was probably the most active and certainly the most advanced program. It has produced some of the people that have made the most difference in health informatics. Vimla herself, of course, has done that. Jose Arocha, for example, here in Applied Health Sciences, was one of the graduates of that program. Another speaker in our series last year was Andrei Kushnaruk. Vimla brings the area of cognitive science and her background in psychology and psychiatry and so on to this field, which has really laid down a basis for thinking about how humans and systems interact, how these systems actually work, how they interact with people who are undertaking cognitive processes like thinking. Much has come from this, and yet it was so quiet at the time that no one knew about it. And then when Vimla left and went to Columbia, it really disappeared, which is unfortunate. More recently, Vimla's work has continued at Columbia, and Jose, I know, has been publishing with her. The big thing is that Vimla is now going with her husband, Ted Shortliff, to Phoenix. Both of them are involved in various aspects of the starting of a new medical school and a new department of biomedical informatics in Phoenix. So a brand new opportunity and a brand new change. And the importance of this is that when Ted was speaking at a recent meeting, he said it's really an opportunity to introduce biomedical informatics into the medical curriculum. And that's what he's looking forward to, which is a great goal, something that's frustrated us totally in most schools, particularly in Canada, but has to be the future if we're going to produce the people we need. So Vimla, I'm looking very much forward to this, and also the fact that you come from an entirely different field, and you had so much of an effect in the area of biomedical informatics. I'd be interested in hearing about all of that. Thank you very much.
Terrific interview. It is really a great pleasure to be here. In fact, it's a delight because I spent 25 years at McGill, from undergraduate psychology to full tenure professor in Department of Medicine and Psychology, and never once visited University of Waterloo. So this is really a great pleasure. And a delight also that I worked under President David Johnson at McGill, and we had a great relationship with him and Dean Richard Cruz, the Dean of Medicine, for 18 years. And now to see him again today after so many years, it was just wonderful. And he hasn't changed one little bit, with just as much energy is infusing into this school as he always had in McGill. You'll have to excuse me if I cough and splutter in between. I'm harboring this cold for the last 2 weeks, and it hasn't gone any better. So today's talk is going to be Why Not series, and it's a pleasure to be to celebrate the 50th anniversary. And to bring in the new sort of concept of cognitive science to a number of you, and some of you, it's an old concept, approach to understanding clinician-computer interaction. As you heard that I am at the biomedical informatics in Columbia University. 9th of April, I moved to university at the Arizona State University and be an interim chair of the new biomedical informatics department, and also appointed at the University of Arizona New Medical School in Phoenix to evaluate new curriculum in the Phoenix Medical School and also the Tucson Medical School. The new medical school in Phoenix is going to have biomedical informatics from day one. And it's also going to have behavioral sciences from day one. So it's going to be somewhat different, and I'll be looking after the evaluation of both medical school and recruiting and building the new biomedical informatics department. So it's going to be a fun thing to do. Now, most of you who ever follow any of the medical journals at all, or even if you don't, if you know what's happening in the domain, the Journal of American Medical Association published this article by Koppel called Role of Computerized Physician Order Entry System in Facilitating Medical Errors. The word facilitating is very important. It had a big impact in the area, and what exactly happened is that this article raised many eyebrows to say, do we really need technology in medicine when it creates so many problems for us? Why can't we just do what we already did? So what they identified was, this is the computer patient order entry system, where medication orders are implemented. And this system, what they found, facilitated, as they say, 22 types of medication errors. And there was a fragmented, displaced, preventing coherent medication view, pharmacy inventory mistaken for dosage guidelines, separation of functions that facilitated double dosing and incompatible orders. There was separation of functions that inflexible ordering formats generating wrong orders by people. And 3/4 of the house staff reporting observed these orders more than once at high-risk areas, indicating that occur quite often. Now, these are serious things. And that sort of generated suddenly everybody saying, do we really need this thing? These things are, although there are many people who do not want to move towards technology. When they have reporting errors like that, that really creates a big panic in the community. So the question comes up, do we want to throw the baby with the bathwater, or do we want to do something about these problems? Within the last year, in our own medical school at Columbia, I was called in because I sit in a patient safety program for a problem we had with the patient to see if there was anything wrong with our training protocol because a patient was overdosed with potassium chloride. So the potassium chloride ordered by IV injection as well as additive IV in an Eclipse computer-based patient order system, and they wanted to know what was the exact problem. And most often they thought the problem was in training of our physicians, training of our residents. So I went in together with my postdoc fellow and wanted to evaluate. So it was an 85-year-old patient admitted to medical ICU intensive care unit with a septic shock and respiratory failure. Okay? The patient received 316 milliequivalents of potassium chloride over 42 hours in the acute and kidney failure setting. What it says, if anybody knows anything about potassium chloride, this is a very excessive high dose. The high dose was delivered due to errors and misperceptions by several care, not by one, but several care providers over a period of time. And what they call is that just series, and it occurred, compounded, it propagated through the system for 3 days without anybody ever catching it. So what exactly happened here? Is this the system? Is it the people? Or is it the interaction between the two? So we went to study this to see exactly what was going on. And this was published in JAMIA, the American Journal of Medical Informatics, in 2005. The hospital initially said, we cannot publish this kind of data. It reports in the hospital. We had to go through lawyers and a lot of committees to say it's to our advantage to publish something like this. The vendors would learn how to develop better systems. We would learn how to train our physicians better. And secondly, to assume that we don't make mistakes is being naive. That as long as we're human beings, we will make mistakes, but let's do something about it. But if you don't publish it, you'll never learn from it. So they agreed, and they did publish it, and this was the product of it. Okay? And I'm so glad we did at the time. So the analysis of failure showed there was a misconception. It wasn't an error, just a simple error, a misconception relation between the IV volume and the time duration. What happened is that residents thought, as human beings thought, that you give so many liters of fluid per period of time. So work by fluids, by liters. Whereas the system was set up by timestamp. So after a certain time it stopped. So there was incompatible between, nobody ever bothered seeing system whether how humans reason and what kind of support they need. It was just put in. And we found this out, and that was one of the biggest problems that occurred. Second, the system did not carry the latest value, and the past value of the new value of the last resident that had put in was not shown clearly, so it was always mistaken for what the latest potassium chloride flow was going. So you could not look at the latest, but you looked at the old one, and therefore you duplicated the orders. There was lack of alerts. Potassium is quite a serious thing. And you'd think by now there'd be alerts set up if there was there's no alert set up at all, hard alert. And inadequate clinical user training regarding safe and official practices. Vendors came in to train our residents. I looked at the education program in quite detail. What happened is they were trained for procedures, what to do, but not what to do if something went wrong. So education that supports training was not there. Training to do simple procedures was there. That is not education. So there's a very big difference between education and training, and that should be separated. It should be well in place if we are to run safe systems in hospital or any kind of healthcare setting, or, as for that matter, any kind of workplace. So why is this thing still desirable given that we have so many problems with it? Well, orders are very legible. If humans start writing and don't do anything by hand, there's a lot of problems. You can't read writing. Transcription is almost eliminated, reduced. Writer can be identified. These days, can't even tell who wrote it unless you do an electronic version. Orders are rapidly routed through many destinations, and orders are rechecked, and by clinical decision support is provided in real time, especially if you have a system like that where you have all the things in place, the pharmacy, the nurse station, radiology, the hospital system, a kind of network in some way, and you want it to be routed. But in this case, even though There were a lot of checkpoints, so why didn't it check? It was like a Swiss cheese. It went through one hole, it went through another, it just all lined up. And it doesn't always happen, you can never check. And sometimes the error or the problem doesn't occur at one point in time, the same error at another point, it can occur. So basically what we are saying is that we have to understand what are the real problems. And you need to understand, in order to understand that, you have to understand the science behind it a little bit more. You have to understand what kind of, how do humans work, how do they function, and cognitive science comes to mind to one of the areas you can fall back on. So for designing for safety, health information technology has reduced the risk of serious injury, and we know that. But they also create extra errors, different opportunities. They made different kinds of errors. That means there are not only intended errors, there are unintended errors that happen. It's the very nature of anything new that you implement, no matter where it is. Things will happen in the perturbations in the system. And errors are a product of cognitive activity in human adaptation as we adapt to any kind of new environment, to complex physical, social, as well as the cultural environment. Implementation is one of the big issues you have to worry about. So how well the design, health information technology complements its intended setting and purpose is critically important for safe and effective performance. So what are the dimensions of human-computer interaction as you interact with the system? And in a very simplistic term, there are two broad dimensions. One is technological, which is hardware and software. And they are very important things to worry. Engineers worry about that. Bioengineers, biomechanics worry a lot about that. Not that they're not important, very important part of it. Second are more cognitive, more the people who interact with it. Issues of representation, how knowledge gets organized, data get organized, knowledge get organized, and how it relates to how people reason and think and kinds of strategies you use as you deal with such data or such information. My talk today, because it's more cognitive science oriented, is going to focus on the second part. And of course, it has to interact with the technological support to some extent. I'm particularly very sensitive to the first part now because my biomedical informatics department in Phoenix is part of Ira Fulton Engineering School. So I'm part of the engineering school working very closely with Department of Computer Science and Information. So for me, it's becoming very much coming home. So in a very simplistic definition, cognitive science brings theories and methods from multiple disciplines to bear to problems of investigation and hand. It incorporates theories from psychology, philosophy, linguistics, anthropology, computer science, investigation of cognitive processes, humans and machines. It's a very simplistic definition. What it says is that as much as clinical science, biomedical science has informed clinical practice, cognitive and social science, there are a lot of advancements in this area that you don't often know about. And that kind of, you can borrow multiples of methods and theories which mostly go hand in hand together to bring to study any particular problem. And it is very important to consider this because we have a large human dimension that we worry about. And there are lots of findings from this area that you can actually apply to study human-computer interaction. And so this is the area that I came out with originally, and I have attempted in my studies to bring some of the concepts that we have learned from there to understand not only how humans think, but how we understand human-computer interaction. And why haven't we used it up till now? Why not? Issue is it's a domain that not everybody understands or has a reason to use it. Why would you? Because it's something far away from the domain that you normally work with. So unless someone brings you to your attention, the importance of it is not something that will automatically appear to you. So what are the key issues? Basic theories and methods come out of how people, the studies of memory, the years of studies of memory in psychology, of the working memory, its relationship to long-term memory, how people store, retrieve information. How do you remember something now and link to your long-term memory when you want to retrieve something from past information? How do this information gets organized in some part of knowledge form? And how do you use strategies and heuristics in solving problems? And what relationship is there between reasoning and the knowledge organization? Kinds of things that you need to know about just general, very basic science studies. It doesn't even have to do anything with technology or anything. It doesn't even have to be applied areas, just basically fundamental basic science. When I started working in medical cognition, these became very much salient to me. Applied to medical problem solving, applied to organization of clinical and basic science knowledge, which I worked a number of years in. Diagnostic and therapeutic strategies in decision making, medical decision making. So you can apply the theories and findings from one area into applications for the next. How does it bridge to informatics? In informatics, we worry about knowledge and data representation. We worry about management of large amounts of information that somehow we have to manage. Human-computer interaction. We want to provide decision support for practitioners in the field. You want to enhance, you want to look at cognitive models. You want to have a decent model that has good predictability. You want to be able to do cognitive assessment of usability and interfaces. And not only that, you want to have targeted training for practice, education in place. So all these issues bring to bear when you're dealing with informatics. These are particularly salient for me because I had never heard of biomedical informatics until early 80s. My first informatics meeting was 1982 in Geneva. I gave a talk on reasoning at one of the meetings in Italy when somebody heard about it from Italy, Mario Stefanelli, and said to me, this has a lot to do with AI. And I said, well, I don't do AI. I do natural intelligence. I don't think about this artificial intelligence thing. So I gave a keynote at European Artificial Intelligence in Madison. And suddenly a lot of people connected and said, this has got a lot to do with machine learning, about directionality of reasoning, and the chaining information. And suddenly I started to relate. And eventually, as time moved on, we started to realize how much I could learn so much from machines that we could borrow to home. There's so much mutual benefit in here that I had not ever realized. I never thought I could ever talk the same language. And that showed that that there is a lot of things that we know about analysis of text comprehension, analysis of medical expertise, things on medical discourse that we can bring into this kind of area. So what are the specific methods that I particularly use in this kind of analysis? Most of my work has been done, particularly in cognitive sciences, naturalistic work in the fields. One of the things we do is shadow people. We follow people around in the clinical to see what they do. Other things we do is we map activities in the intensive care units, for example, emergency unit, and timestamp the interaction as they do an event very critically. Other things we do is brief interviews of people, very great interviews to see what the infrastructure roles, shifting timings, and also, more importantly, what are the philosophies about certain kinds of views. Because what they say and what they do aren't the same thing. So we want to get detailed log files of clinical information system and attempting to correlate with the observational data. So these are kind of broad things, but there are many other things we do as well. These are kind of more specific methods we use for detailed data analysis. One of the things we do a lot of, most of people coming from psychology would know, is a think aloud protocol. What it is basically is people doing a task, and you put a microphone on it and ask them to think aloud, do not evaluate, think as what you're doing. So we can, as investigators, interpret what they are thinking about. Think aloud protocol came out of Erickson and Simon from Carnegie Mellon, and a very well-known method for using that, and we still use it. We use some of the probes in much more detail and use probe to constrain, otherwise you have a lot of data and a lot of junk information you can't deal with. So now I want to walk through 2 clinical examples with kinds of work to show how such information is being used to understand human-computer interaction and how cognitive science principles are being used. One is the effect of technology on human behavior, and second is clinical workflow in a triage, in the decision making, in the clinical setting, in emergency, and technological support that we recommendation should provide. So the issue here is, how can we bring in science to understand some of the problems that are very practical to us? This paper was published in 2001 with Patel, Christianuk, Yang, and Yale. At that time, Andrei Christianuk was my PhD student at that moment at McGill. And this study we did together is the effect of electronic medical system on human cognition. Well, what had happened is the hospital did not have any electronic medical record system. Our diabetic unit, the endocrine unit, were just asked by a company, Development Pacanche from Quebec, to put in a system to use. So we decided to collaborate with them and apply for a grant through Medical Research Council. And we was awarded this grant to look at what kind of impact the system would have. The idea was that the chairman of medicine, David Goldsman, at the time told me that he'd be very interested in implementing the system of the hospital if it works for us. So it was a good testing bed. So what we did, we took a number of physicians, matched them very carefully for type 2 diabetic patients, etc., and took a paper-based records for all of them, number of patients. And then we introduced electronic record system. Then we took the electronic record printout as well. And then 6 months later, we removed the electronic record system. They went back to paper. The issue was, did they have any kind of impact on changes? So I want to just go over to transition from paper record to electronic and back to paper. Excuse me. The issue was particularly my interest was to look at how they organize the knowledge, information, and how they reason with it. I had reason to believe that might change. And the issue was, one of the hypotheses was that information and other technologies are not just tools to expedite and facilitate and enable execution of any task. It does more than that. It's not just there to support. It changes the way we do things, the way we think about things. But we had to empirically show it. We always believe that, but empirically showing is another issue. So what we did, in the handheld patient record, which we extracted all the information that was in the both the system here, chief complaint, past history, right down to treatment, and we extracted all the bits of information from both sides. As you can notice, the total amount of information in both data is not really that different, so it doesn't change. So does anything change? These two went up in the electronic record, and these went down. For purpose of this talk, it's not important to know why those two went up and the others went down, although it's an important issue in its own right. It's not important. What is important is that it did change. It changed the organization of information. The moment you have changed that, you've changed the organization of information in the site, a lot of other things start to happen. Now, this is the first part of the patient, before you enter the electronic record system. As you notice, it's a narrative. 74-year-old woman whose diagnosis was made in February. It's a sentence, complete sentences. You are not required to make any inferences from it. Okay, so if someone who's not an expert in this domain would not have to make any inference because it's all there. There's no gaps in information. We analyzed in much greater detail than what I'm going to show you, because we actually broke them down into the idea unit, into propositions, to find out where the gaps were and where not. So somebody picking it up didn't require any information. When you take up the electronic record system, it's not like that. These are not connected. It's a discrete information. You actually have to make a link between. You have to tell a story. Story is not there. okay, whatever you want to do. But if you're an expert, this story is very similar. But if you are standing by for someone who's not an expert, as you often do, you would fill in the gaps of the information that may or may not be accurate. When you went back to electronic, paper-based, you came out like this. So what it really shows is that going back to paper after doing electronic, you take the format of the electronic and not the narrative, which shows that you have an impact in such a way because it's ease with which you do things. The theory says that if you organize the information differently, your strategies that you use to dealing with this information also changes. Excuse me. If that is true, then the way you reason must change too. All right. So, by the way, I also want to tell you that other kinds of information that we did, there are a lot of analysis of this as to whether people, when they go through this whole sequence, whether you go in one sequence from top to bottom, or you go back and forth, or you, with experts and who are not so expert, the huge differences as the way you do. Whether you do multitasking, you're talking with your patient, you're looking at the computer. Experts are able to do multitasking. They're talking with the physicians about patients, about how you're today, how's the family, or they're looking at the medication one time. This all published in the same paper, so you can access it. But the purpose of this talk is I want to talk about reasoning. So what happened here was, in the paper-based record, the patient, you're talking to the patient, you got the patient information, and then you generated multiple hypotheses coming out with possible diagnostic hypotheses. Okay? So you have a large amount of information you're trying to manage within a limited amount of time. And then, in an electronic record system, you have, this system had filters that came up with few bits of information that you got from the patient. It said, do you want to look at respiratory filter? Do you want to look at endocrine filter? Do you want to look at nephrology filter? So locked you in very early. And then you evaluated the patient data based on this. So what it really did, so if you got the wrong filter from the beginning, you're up the garden path. You're locked into that. But it helps you manage the data. Managing data was wonderful, but it locked you in much too early. On the other one, you had far too much information to manage. So either way, it wasn't very good. The way the electronic medical record system was set up was not very good because you could generate kinds of errors you don't want. Other one is not very good because you got to shift the important, relevant information from not so relevant information. Okay, it's not very easy. So what happens when you go back to paper? You reasoned like electronic. Okay, so that also had an impact on reasoning. So what it says, it has a huge impact on the way you think and reason about things. It's not just a thing, you can't just put anything there and say, it's fine to do. It's not, because it changes. Now, what does all this mean? So if you start looking at the organization of knowledge, information in medical domain, it comes down to epistemology of medical information. Medical knowledge in problem solving is structured in such a way is that you do patient observations at the bottom. These are the patient observations. So when a doctor talks to a patient, gets a whole lot of observation. And next level is the finding. Not all observations are included next level as you move forward. Some of them are junk, I might say, doctor, I came here to see you because I've got a really, really bad knee. But then I also say, by the way, I didn't sleep so well last night. And he might just disregard it. He may not consider it very important. And then you build up another level of clusters of information. And then you develop a diagnostic level, and finally you decide at the system level whether you have a nephrology problem, a cardiology problem, or so on. When you're doing paper-based thing, you are here. You're going to have this much of information, you have to come up here. When you're doing electronic that we were doing, you are here coming back here. Either one is not very efficient. What it really is this important concept is this intermediate construct. What it means is that people who are good at doing something, for example, an expert, a chess player, has clusters of information boards practice they have in mind. So we show them the board pieces quickly, they'll recognize that. That's not because they calculate from bottom up or top down. They really have a lot of intermediate constructs in their head, and they can permute it and they can compute it very quickly. An expert mathematician or child mathematician, if you ask them to multiply 2,560 times 4,460, they'll quickly give you this information. It's not because they're calculating from bottom or from the top. They have a lot of calculations on their heads that they're quickly able to do that. Sports expert, they can tell you in advance a particular scene where things are and able to act accordingly. That means that in medical domain, you have a lot of information you can keep at this level. Residents keep a lot of information at that level that you can easily access. So when you have diseases that you're familiar with and diseases that you're not so familiar with, everything is not new about unfamiliarity. It's only parts of it that are unfamiliar. So that's the part you commute and permute again. But the rest you can access easily. So teaching an electronic record should really be set up at this level. We went to study further, which I'm not talking about today, about what implication it has for patients. For example, that narrative, it was much too much information for physicians in this case, for making a diagnosis and treatment at this point in time. But that information was very important for patient narrative, for long term, to keep in electronic record for a completely different reason, and that's a different issue. But important thing is that you have to use some of these kinds of methods and theories to understand what exactly is going on and what kind of things we can learn for developing better systems. So influence of technology on human cognition. Information and other technologies are not merely tools, as we always think, to help things, facilitate, and execute tasks. They have profound and enduring consequences. They stay with us for a while. Optimal design requires sensitivity to internal organization of concepts by human beings. Utility and acceptance depend on designers' recognition that the system is a mediator, okay, of cognition. It's reorganized as cognition. It's quite important, and therefore systems have a big impact, and to keep that in mind as one designs things as we move forward. I want to quickly talk about the second part, clinical workflow. This is another part of it, just to show how you need some data in advance before you start developing technology to understand what kind of support I need. Expert systems did a lot of, it made us aware of a lot of things that one could do for the expert system, but also made us aware that really what we need, what we call, is support systems. That we have moved away from talking about expert system, we're talking about support system. We're talking about information technology instead of ergonomics and that kind of. There's a lot of shift in vocabularies over time that has a different way of looking at things. One of the things we had is, I work in the emergency department, and this work is, by the way, supported from National Library of Medicine as an R01 to look at cognition and errors in emergency in critical care. That means ICU and emergency department. So one of the things we want to know, what is currently going on in emergency unit, and how can technology, or can it, help to support what's going on? So what we looked at, so one of the things we learned very quickly is there are multiple team people. We don't work individually. There are team people, there are pharmacists, there are physicians, there are nurses work together. And each of them represent a different level because they have different data. They actually process different data sets. It's not the same. And then when they have to collaborate, this data has to merge in some way. If you're going, they're going to have some shared information before you can assume. And this is kind of became a core to the thing. So in working with technology in the hospital, you have an intellectual partnership. So one of the things that we work very closely with the concept of distributed cognition. And people working with systems are very familiar with distributed systems. This is the same similar concept, but it is distributed between human and computers, and between humans and between computers as well. And the thing is, intellectual partnership basically means here is that when a person sits in front of a computer, you have knowledge resides not only in your head, but also in the computer. So you want the best resource match between what you already know and what support you're getting. And you might want to use PDA at the same time. You have a book that you write a note in, and information get exchanged in places. So you share information as you go. It gets distributed along the way. In order to get most efficient, most effective, and safe outcome, you really need to make sure that your internal resources match the external resources. No use giving me support somewhere I don't need. If I can remember things very well at this point in time, don't give me anything I don't want to have. But when I do need, so we need to understand what kind of support I need at what time. And this is the kind of concept we are using. This kind of concept comes out of cognitive science. We're supposed to study. So coordinating the user's mind in the external and the internal environment. Okay? These are some of the references for most recent in the last 2 years. A paper that came out of my lab. These are all my doctors and master students in the area of, they're all published or in press or already on the web with 2006 or currently right now. And these are in the artificial intelligence in medicine or in JAMIA or one of these, or Journal of Biomedical Informatics. In each of the areas, we talk about many. I'm in the area of mental health, so we also have an emergency in the perceived violations in psychiatry and in the ICU particularly here, and also in the handoffs during an emergency department, and also in the triage. So there's a whole lot of areas that most recent that you could access, and they're easily accessible. And we have many others ones as well, but these are most recent ones that are published. So overview of the clinical workflow in the emergency department. So you have an emergency, you have an ambulance entering, and you have people that walk in as an ambulatory care. Okay, people walking both sides. So then what they have to do, immediately triage. And triage meaning most urgent, less urgent, and high priority. Nurses have to do this in triage. There are triage guidelines, but people don't always use them. Then you have critical patients are transported to immediate attention, and the rest assigned to area 2 or to area 1 for psychiatry, because we have a psychiatry which is separate. Psychiatry, you have to immediately decide the patient is danger to himself and to others. Now, then the patients are transported to the waiting area. This is the point of potential error, very high, because you've got to do very quick triage. People entering, you don't even know. All psychiatry patients don't manifest in a psychiatric disorder. Sometimes they come in various other kinds. You've got to do a very quick triage and decide, and then suddenly able to switch. Take less urgent people and put them in an urgent category. A lot of errors occur in these kinds of them here for our analysis show. Then as you move forward, patients are called in by priority. You have physicians, residents, and they continually do documentation, they teach, they consult, and they immediate intervention. They're multitasking. If you think you can do everything very well, well, you can't. Something has to go. And you do make a lot of errors by the very nature of this. Then these people constantly interact because they're interrupted. Points of interruption, they're called away at each time to do other things, because that's the nature of the critical care. Somebody's, they need urgent help, you move. And these are the other problems that you occur. There's a huge point of potential errors. So after a lot of methods we use, we identify the errors and nature of the errors and where they occur and why they occur and what kind of decision support we could provide. Okay? I want to quickly walk through that. Just want to show you one data quickly. There's one set of them. All of these, of each part of the aspect, are detailed, illustrated in all of the papers. So one thing here we have is the duration time that you are interrupted. This is over 3 hours. And this is the type of interruption, whether you are attending physician or ED or the resident or the patient. Okay? And the total time of interruption is yellow. And this is the duration, how long you're interrupted. So you find that nurses are interrupted most often. So quickly go and come back, quickly go and come back, many things. But residents are mostly, when they go, they're gone for a longer period of time. So the question is, when they come back, can they always start where they left? Because you've already forgotten what you have done in the meantime, or you've already moved ahead if you're in the rounds. And those kind of detailed analysis, very detailed analysis of what concept you're left with and where you're picking it up and what happens and how is the information flow is very critical here to analyze. And what kind of support you need at this point in time. So I just want to walk through some of the recommendations analysis. This is the pre-triage in the emergency. So you see the patient's ID. We find the patients walk in, the names are often misspelled. And they're misspelled, they have more than one entry in the electronic record system. So you cannot get. So one of the things you can do is to separate in the waiting room electronic point of entry so that you have more privacy. Sometimes decision support system, no decision support system, patient history and practice guidelines are not accessible anywhere. So you could have an integrated tracking EMR system for immediate recall. Another thing is the waiting room activity is not monitored. You can have, these days you can have radio frequency ID system in the bracelets you can put in. They're inexpensive. You can do a better tracking system and all kinds of things that you can do to elevate all these problems. The number of problems we identified are horrendous. As we move forward, the other kinds of problems, the huge communication, all kinds of problems that occurred with decision support, there wasn't any. People running, chasing after people with district nurses for interpreters. Where we work, large percentage of population Spanish speaking. We have to look for interpreters. We've got to really follow them, chase them. That's inefficient. It's very costly because it's time in terms of human resources. And all these things spelled that we really need an RFID technology with patient tracking, which is I recommended and which is our next step of the study right now. Just want to show you a little bit more detail in this, so it's not so. We did a task flow analysis. They required 14 tasks here to do. Pre-triage, 3 tasks, 5 tasks for triage, registration desk 1, and 3 tasks for patient transfer. So what happened is the patient, and we have the triage nurse as they interact with the district nurse, and these are the stations, all the 4 areas. And they have computers over here, and they interact here. And then these all interact with paper charts. Okay? And then as they go here, there are the EMR, it interacts there, and finally it goes in here. The important thing here, the patient moves faster than the paper trail. So your patient is not tracking you anywhere. And this is how the system is. And you have 14 tasks here that's done and takes very long to do. We recommended this side of the thing. We suggested that if you do this way, you'll have 9 tasks to do. Very efficient. Pre-triage 3 tasks, and you only got 5, you only got 1, you cut down a lot. And the patient, the information moves faster than the patient. So you can see what kind of support you need here. It's all hooked up to all this thing with a wireless router they can put in. And the district nurses don't have to be chased. Information can go directly there, and it's all connected and can very fast and very efficient. All this problem about information transfer, about handoffs at time is all eliminated or reduced. This is just a one suggestion, but there are many other possibilities and things. The reason we suggested that because this system could be tied into hospital system that already exists. It's very important. You can't just put in any system because you think is important if it doesn't hook on to already what the hospital's buying. It's hospital buying. So we had to negotiate with the hospital to see. Other thing, we had to negotiate with the vendors to say that if we had to modify this, our order entry system to some extent to be able to hook on to the order entry system on the other end. So a lot of negotiations are required, making sure you have a buy-in with everybody, and to study this, bring the science part here to the clinical environment to have a practical impact. So there's a lot of things that goes in between here that needs to be done at various levels, and this is where collaborations come in. You need various level collaborations with various people, engineers, computer scientists, clinicians, people at top level in the hospitals, and good researchers who understand psychology and understand human-computer interactions. And so in the summary, is that failure in interaction among human beings and agent lead to delays, inefficient, and opportunities for errors. Okay? When information technology is not implemented or not integrated into the workflow, unnecessary tasks are performed and errors are generated. You need to replace inadequate and non-existent technological support of clinicians by specific information and communication technologies that fit the cognitive and workflow demands of the task. There are wonderful communication technologies now with collaborative groupware and workware available. And we find one of the biggest loss of information is during handoffs, when information is handed off from one to the other. Data analysis over from 24 hours, night shift and day shift told us how much information loss there is. And sometimes very critical information loss that you can make decisions on. One thing I haven't talked about much at all, but I do want to just touch on. We are all familiar with the problems we have in our daily lives using devices. I always give an example of my new microwave. I've got a brand new microwave, which is really wonderful, but I can't use it. I used to be able to do it very well, simple things that I needed to do. Now it's got a complex programming thing in it because it's the state of the art. My son told me, Mom, I got to have a state of the art stuff. Why am I using this thing? I cannot, it doesn't do the same things I used to do. I have to relearn everything. And second thing is a big cultural problem, is that if I want to do it says baked potato, I don't bake potatoes. What I do, it doesn't do. And so not only is one problem is the other. A coffee machine, with a new coffee machine, I have a similar problem. Telephone answering system, and also relearning takes time. And each telephone system to another telephone system is different. This is really not, so there's some kind of, this is a real problem. And so if we talk about usability, issues of usability becomes important. You got to know. And so in the HCI landscape, most people must be familiar with, what are the things we've got to worry about? One is the usability evaluation of the system. We did a lot of work in this area, and particularly I'm interested in usability in the hospital, clinical, of cardiac monitors and infusion pumps, for example. There are two kinds of studies that are done. Is one called usability inspection and one called usability testing. And the usability inspection is mostly an expert review. What really you do here is the heuristic evaluations. There are already a set of heuristics that are available for making sure that you don't violate them in any way. And then you evaluate based on that heuristics. We did studies on infusion pumps that are used in the intensive care unit by nurses and other professionals who use them. And once we were using at Columbia in the ICU for a number of years, we found there were really serious violations. And we published that work and we reported it. And the hospital said they would take action, but as always, it sits at the bottom of the pile. 2 months after our publication, the vendor removed that pump off the market. So that pump is now, Baxter pump is off the market. And that data is published, by the way. So it shows the number of violations. Cognitive walkthrough is usually done by an expert, but it has to be somebody who knows about the system. So it doesn't have to be in context. The system run the way the engineers planned it to do. You can walk through the system. And walking through means you put a microphone behind them, and cognitive walkthrough means just let them think through the system as they're doing. We published quite a bit of work on that on a number of tasks for a number of years. We did it in McGill and continue to do so. And Andre Christian, who's at University of Victoria, has really continued to work in this domain. And David Kaufman, who was also my student at McGill, who works with me now, is a faculty at Columbia, really works quite a bit in this domain with patient interaction with the home monitoring system. Another one is usability testing. You can do usability testing in the field. How usable is the system? Is it user-friendly? Do I want an icon? Navigation through the system. Sometimes the icons are put on this side, and I use it on that side, and you just cannot use it. It takes you longer to find where things are, and when you reorganize it. So a lot of information. You can do laboratory control experimentation. You can also do field experimentation. And these are important issues to do. They are not, you can, and there are some good basic principles you can bring to bear human-computer interaction. So the nicest thing is to bring studies of human-computer interaction together with some of the studies of human performance from cognitive science into under one domain to be able to work, because they're not separate really. They're two issues you can deal with, because you can have more than one issues. Everybody doesn't need to work on all of this, but you can focus down on one. This is one example. If you see a sign like that and you suddenly say, now what do I trust? Keep right. So I'm going to finish off with one slide, two quick slides. One is sort of where are we currently in state of the art in technology. So here is the sophistication of user. I call myself a low sophisticated technology user. Some of you might be a very high sophisticated user. And the sophistication of technology is low and high. And I come in this one. I'm fine with technology that currently is because it delivers what I need to do. I don't need to do too high. And then there is one here that people who are really very sophisticated, for them low technology is useless. Okay? Here, the people who are high sophisticated users and high sophisticated technology matches perfectly. Okay? No problem with that. And here, for people like me, when they have high sophistication like my microwave, it's a problem. It's an excess functionality that I can't deal with. That's a real problem. Basically, no matter whether we like it or not, technology is going to get more and more sophisticated. And it's going to be, there's no question about that. And so the problem is going to be is that current trend of excess functionality will be an issue. Training users to use them will be a huge issue, or matching what we need to do. What we really need to do is mask the details from the user. Absolutely. But we need to deal with small things. I don't want to see in my video machine. I want to press turn on, off. If I want to record, I can record. I do not want to see details in front of me. If I want to do sophisticated, I can go one layer below. I can press a button, takes me below. And if somebody is more sophisticated, but don't give me in front of me. You're making you give me memory overload, and I have to navigate through this thing to find out where buttons are. And now what I've done is I put a sticker in each one of them to see where I got to go. It takes me too long to figure out where they are. And as we age, our eyes aren't getting better. And my fingers aren't getting any smaller to kind of press the thumbs. So huge issue. So you have to mask it from the average user, kind of thing. And these are the issues we'll have to keep considering and worry about as we're moving forward. Some lessons from cognitive science. Design of health information technology must complement its intended setting and purpose to encourage safe and effective performance. Okay? It's not only efficient and effective, it should be safe. Technology can help manage errors because a lot of errors will generate whether we like it or not, but also introduce new opportunities for errors. Thus, it has to be carefully monitored for intended and unintended consequences. Technology must support and be sensitive to how we do our task in clinical environment, exception, of course, when we don't do our task poorly without technology. One of the things very important that I've been working on right now is my current baby, is that I'm looking at boundaries of errors. I'm looking at when is it that the physicians working in high velocity areas, such critical care, when do they cross the boundary of errors? When do they start to make a mistake? When do they really, and catch it suddenly? And when is it they really make a mistake and they don't catch it? If we understand that boundary, then we can build a system that deals with that boundary. So we don't have to do anything about it, the systems are built to accommodate us. The thing is that we need to have proactive data. We need to know what people do. In the airline industry, even though we evaluate after the fact, after a disaster has occurred, there is a black box that gives you proactive data. There's nothing like that in medicine. So why don't we have it? Something that collects data so that we can interpret and say what really happened at that moment in time. Was it the hospital policy that made me do something that created an error? Was it because I didn't have any sleep last night? Was it that the support of nurses over the weekend was not there? Or was it really I just didn't know? Or was it I had overload of information? Or I really made such a mistake because I just thought it was the wrong thing, or I misread something? You're not going to know, because evaluating after the fact, you have introduced post hoc bias. You only evaluate, if you think something was a disaster, you'll evaluate negatively. So that's something I'm working on currently. That's my latest baby right now, and very important to understand that. Excuse me, my throat isn't getting any better. Okay. Last slide. So this book called Biomedical Informatics by Ted Shortliff and Associate Editor Jim Cimino. This is a third edition of the book. Excuse me, this just came out. And just want to show the role of cognitive science and biomedical informatics. Never before this area was covered. This is the first time this chapter is included in this book. This book is used by a lot of medical informaticians in this training program. That's showing that it has value in this thing, and that it will, and I'm hoping more and more it will permeate through it. So quite a last chapter, just showing that people are recognizing as large imaging. This whole book is organized around what I consider as biomedical informatics, which is bioinformatics. We're talking about genomic project, moving to imaging, very, very important aspect of the whole thing, moving towards clinical informatics with medical, nursing, health, moving towards public health. So it spans the whole thing. So first part of the book is dedicated to the theory, the foundations. And second part of the book is all the application domains. So it's showing, so cognitive science goes in the first part, showing what kind of relationship it has to the others. Basically, so with that, I want to close my session to say that this is to think about cognitive science just one of the sciences, cognitive social sciences. Many other sciences that might bring to bear as we're moving forward. And I think it's more and more important we got to come back to study scientific foundations for no matter what we do. Education, training, building systems, no matter which way you cut it, you're talking about an efficient, effective, safe workplace. Okay? Thank you.
Well, we'll now take questions from the audience as well as from the website and yes, I will get that, and from the video conference group. First, I just want to make it clear that Dominic has the same, he's very sympathetic about the whole technology part and how it's getting too sophisticated. He's just the recent owner of a new, very advanced watch. The only problem is you can't set the right time.
I've learned that it's easier to correct it by 2 hours than to try to reset it.
Okay.
It is Don over here too. If you want to ask a question, just wait for the microphone.
I have to apologize a little bit. I mean, whenever I was playing lands, now I've got an ear block. So one of the things is not only have I got cold, I've got a block in my ear. So if I don't understand you perfectly in the first round, excuse me. Okay.
I'd like to make a comment and then ask a question. In the 80s, an architect by the name of Christopher Alexander came up with the idea of patterns for good buildings. Okay, and he documented all this. The software people quickly picked it up, and they came up with patterns in software design. Now we have business patterns and patterns all over the place. This seems to be crying out for such an organization. You know, in other words, I call them outlines of good practice, so to speak, because, you know, you brought out several things there would seem, I'll say, obvious when you see them, but not obvious. So it just seems that you should be. Is anybody working on this kind of thing of collecting?
I think people are starting to realize, and they are working on it. There are, you know, what happens is that when people don't publish, you don't get to know much about it. They're not out there. So even if people are working on it, you don't always see it there. And I think there's another thing I want to advocate, that is to get it out there so people can view. I'm a stickler for publishing. So that's one thing. So people are working and they are thinking, and I think there's probably more and more now than ever before. And other thing is that not only working on it, need funding to work on this, some of this stuff. And we fall between cracks. We not only so one person said, well, this is not my territory, this is your territory. To be able to team up, to be able to work together, we need and they will fund collaborative projects, even though I do believe some best work is done in a kind of really sitting down individually. But collaborative is also important. But I think there's one way we can do it, get people to work on it, is that really applying for a collaborative project, but identifying them, the granting agency will buy. So fighting for this kind of thing, more people fighting for it every level, is kind of also important. And I think that's one of the other drawbacks we have, are not working on it. Third, the biggest one is that, science, nicest part of our science is always obvious. It's a very simplistic thing. But it is so labor intensive. It takes time. It takes a lot of perseverance and tolerance. I never let go from the day I started this program. When I started graduate program in my undergraduate degree first year, 1978. I hooked onto it in 1980. I never let go of that thread. I stayed with it, bared with it, long run. So bearing with it, seeing systematically takes effort and time. We are very much of quick and dirty work, very fast, although it's necessary because you've got to have the system out there in the first generation. But this is the other drawback we have. So why not? Well, the question is that it takes time and effort, and we don't have the patience these days. I want to go on there.
Other questions? Make sure anybody would like to ask a question. I have one for you. The kinds of issues that you have discussed have actually been dealt with over the last 30 or 40 years in the area of nuclear reactor control rooms and also the cockpit, the pilot cockpit. And I know Kathy's done some work in that area. How does that overlap? Like, what do we learn from that? Is this overlapping with that? Are there distinct issues? What can we learn, if you want, from the area of aerospace or that type of thing?
There is a lot of work done in many areas. There's nuclear plant area, nuclear plants. There is work in airline industries. There's a lot of work in transportation industry, in fact, in Europe. European literature is full with transportation industry. TGV, when it was built in France, that was one of the biggest examples of study. So there's a lot of work done in the area, and people like Kim Vincent from Toronto has done a lot of work in this area as well. And the thing is that we have learned a lot from them. One of the things we have learned from the airline industry is that they went automated. They started to automate things very early, and we learned from there that when they went on doing things automatically, it was a disaster. So you cannot do complete. Say, I'm going to give you. We're just going to control you completely. And we've learned from that you really, what we're talking about is support. You support them to do things. Second things we know is how to train pilots. I mean, look at in Montreal, you've got one of the biggest CEA systems there of pilot training. I went on the CEA training program a number of times, and you have the ways of simulators that model your physical well-being, or whether you are physiological systems as well as what you do, and monitoring and train you. Even with the new airlines now, they're starting to train them with simulators. We have used in anesthesiology, but we haven't really advanced very much in using some of those. There are many things that airline industry is much further ahead on a lot of these things, and we could learn from some of them. We are learning, but not that fast. And transportation industry in Europe, European industry is very, very far ahead in a lot of things that they're doing, and a lot of work on what happened with TGV and other kinds of things. So nuclear plant. So now these lessons we are not as quick to learn. One of the reasons is that we always think healthcare industry is different. It's not really that different.
It's interesting, the little metaphor you used about your errors at the beginning, the Swiss cheese, I believe comes from nuclear reactor industry, where they had the image of cards with the errors aligning through a series of cards so that the sequence of errors, in fact, led to the disaster that they thought was highly improbable.
Right.
So there's a big aspect there. The other thing that you might comment on is it comes up in safety a lot, is the only reason we have radar altimeters on planes is because a plane crashed outside Dulles by running into a hill. I mean, what can be done to show the bodies, is the way I put it, in the health area beyond the IOM report, Institute of Medicine report. What do we have to do to make people aware that there are huge safety issues, both with things the way they are, and we also have to be careful of that with technology?
I thought that people are already aware now that there are huge safety issues.
Not really. It's not focal. It's not every day as obvious as it should be at the grassroots.
Well, then I'm not sure how to answer that question, because I thought right now one of the biggest thing is that everybody's tongue. That's what it is. The tiniest of things happening in the hospital will automatically say, "Wow, there's a mistake." And given U.S. setting, first thing they want to do is sue, the hospital and people, and that has even made people not to report errors. So because you are the last person in the chain, because you've got a close proximity between the person and the error that occurs, but what the system that happened. So I thought, and so I'm not sure how to answer the question, because when I look at it, I thought it was quite a bit of the awareness out there, but not awareness of what can we do about it. And that's where we bring in a little bit of science and collaboration between engineers and computer scientists and people who are on the more on the psychological kind of realm.
There's a question over here.
Hi. In some of the work that I've done on hospital wards and in clinics has been very similar to yours in terms of shadowing people and dressing up.
Would you speak just a little louder?
I'll articulate as well. In some of the work that my group has done on hospital wards and in clinic, we've done shadowing as well. And we've also tracked some error. One of the things that we also did, though, was we tried to figure out what people were doing to repair error. In other words, to repair error, to fix problems. Because we noticed there was...
Repair?
Excuse me? Repair. Fix.
Repair errors, okay.
We noticed that there was a lot of informal redundancy built into systems. That people themselves on the wards had figured out ways to cope with some of the errors that they in fact were anticipating. Did you notice any of that? Did you notice the informal work that was going on?
One study that I did is now 2 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, and I haven't followed up on that one, which I am currently going to follow up. So that's an interesting question. So one of the hypotheses that's floating around is that experts don't make so many errors. People who are not good at it make more errors, residents more errors. And our data that I reported at Cognitive Science Society meeting 2 years ago showed that I did in intensive care unit, showed that with a very fine study, analysis, a detail of second by almost seconds, noted that expert made many, many errors, but they recovered so fast that average eye cannot pick up. So ability, not only, they will say, give him 2 milligrams of that, and suddenly say, no, don't give that, give something else, and quickly evaluate. Very, very quickly able to move back and forth. So in other words, ability to be able to repair, shift very quickly was the hallmark of expertise in this case. Residents made the errors but didn't recover as quickly. But the errors that made were trivial errors. Students did not recover, but the errors they made were very serious. So it was kind of a different nature. But we had 2 subjects only in each, but these are labor-intensive, following long periods of time. And so what it says is that it is what we call metacognition, ability to evaluate yourself when you are wrong or right, very quickly in a very tight environment. Very, very interesting. So we had tape recorders around them. They recorded every second of time. And that data, only way it's published right now is in Cognitive Science Proceedings, but hasn't been written up because I need more information to collect on it. But that's a very interesting finding, and I think Haven't seen too much of it, but I think it jives with some of the other work done in the European setting. I have to look into it a little bit more, but I don't know as much about it.
One of the things that we know is that experts also knew the informal systems of repair. They knew more who to go to fix things, whereas the novices did not. And we were thinking that part of education, particularly in stressful situations, ought to be really geared towards novices understanding the social system of the wards in which they're on better than they do.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Got nice data.
My background is more to do with systems and servers, mail servers, database servers, and reliability and errors in those. Now, the studies which I've seen there is that most of the time failures happen because of operator error. Somebody did something wrong, which system could not anticipate, and you could not predict the system is dying, unlike in hospital situations. And the hard part, I mean, which I find relating work back and forth, is drawing the line of when an error was caused by a user, or when was the system misleading the user to believe that an error is caused. And it's kind of, I've actually seen no studies done on this in which relate these to various situations as to actually pinpointing where the problem was. It happens in airlines where you have the black box. At the end of the day, you come to one conclusion. But have you ever done studies as to find out if the person was to blame really, or was it their an indirect cause?
So the references that I gave, some of them will tell you those studies. So what we did, we first of all we did a clinical workflow, who's doing what where. Then we selected the areas which we considered the areas where most likely to be errors to be generated. Then we narrowed down on it and collected very detailed data. We had a microphone around the physician or the resident working, and around the other people who were working with us. So all the interactive data was collected. So, and then what we did is, so one of the downside of such data is that you have to collect a lot of data before you find one really serious error. So we found that when they made a near miss, although the person said, oh my God, I nearly gave double dose here. So we already have the data leading to that. So we can backtrack now what happened at that moment in time. And in this case, what had happened is that the physician had just come back from the night shift. Was really tired. At the same time, it happened to be a Saturday. Not too much support was provided. Excuse me. Although he was the immediate cause of the error. He is not really completely. So what one should do, instead of blaming that person, say, what can we do to provide support for this person, so a person who comes from a night shift with X number of hours of sleep, and what kind of likely errors they're likely to make. So you need, so the upside of this kind of study, it exactly tells you, or when they have actually completely missed it and has been a disaster. We had in psychiatry recently. We could actually point it exactly what happened. So now, how do we do study like this? Would people ever agree to being studied like that? So we had a certificate of confidentiality from NIH. We do not have to report to in court of law if we are ever done that, because our data do show exactly what happened in the moment. Why was the patient given sort of 100 times the dose of a medication in psychiatry emergency than it should have been given? And not only given 100 times the dose, why didn't the nurse pick it up, that dose was unusual? Why did pharmacy even dispense such a large dose? So it was propagated through things. So the interesting thing was, the physician was fired from the hospital, was asked to leave, but although directly responsible because she should have seen what was coming, but there are a lot of other things that have to be corrected. Next person is likely to make the same error. Okay, so immediately, that doesn't mean the person is not completely responsible, but what leads up to it. But we don't automatically keep recordings of anything. I would like to see one of these days when we keep a black box kind of thing, you know.
Thank you for that. Well, Thanks for the nice presentation. I think just the last point, one of the work that we are doing here with Jose is that when you have EMRs, it is possible to do what we call intelligent error checking, which is something like you were saying, no, you give 10 times or 100 times those, there should be a warning system that's telling, at least warning, saying, is this really what you want to do? Okay. Some of this can be done, of course, technologically, but of course, it cannot be, said more that training is very important, and it is no different in the airline industry. I mean, where when the initial glass cockpit came, there were a lot of errors because of bad training, right? Or we are learning to train them, basically. Okay. So I still feel one other thing that is still a problem is that we are now collecting with EMR millions of data, right? Now the question is anyone working towards using all of them? You know, for example, a patient for each patient you have maybe hundreds and thousands of points of data, but even the best medical expert in the world cannot digest when you have that kind of data for hundreds and thousands of patients. That's where I feel there is still a huge problem convincing both practitioners as well as research people to take up that challenge. You have all this data, but what are you doing with it?
In fact, you're absolutely right. One of the things that I mentioned earlier, that when you introduce anything new, unintended things happen. The unintended consequence of information explosion is that now we have a lot more information that we have to process. So in a way, everybody demands things fast, quickly, because you have technology to do it. You know, you put pressure on you, and you have to shift through. You have to very quickly shift out what is important from not important with that much of information. That's not so easy, and that is a huge challenge, and I absolutely agree with you. The other big challenge with EMRs is that system builders want to have information for clinical guidelines, for example, a support system that I've done a lot of work in. The designers, when we do computer-based coding, computer languages, glyph language, for example, that I use, or Arden syntax, whatever you use, what you really have is you want to have the simplest rules that you can use from point A to B without too much detail in between. Otherwise, it won't run easily. Doctors want to put in additional information because if they go quickly, then they can make a mistake. There's always this problem, and one of the mistakes that get generated is because there's no additional information for physicians there, and yet designers have to have it simple. So this is the kind of issue, and then able to download every platform in a consistent way so you treat the patient the same way. These are another added issue to the information bombardment you already have, and it's a big problem. And I think, again, this is why science is so important. Excuse me. Science is so important because we're coming back to basics. What do we start off with? I started off my basic research in comprehension. And what it said was, how do people, when you read a medical text, how do you separate out what is important from what's not so important? And how do you use that information in order to make a decision? And when experts are able to do this so fast, how are they able to do it? And when novice is doing someone so little, so badly, what do? And someone who's in between. And we found that experts do it very well because they just know it. Novices don't do it well because they just don't understand it. Intermediates are the worst because they have so much information. They're unable to separate the important, relevant from irrelevant. Therefore, you actually have a dip in a performance. You actually, it's not. So what we're really showing is that fundamental stuff, we're coming back again to the same thing. So the scientific issue hasn't changed. So you're absolutely right. We are going to be bombarded with that, and that's something we're going to have to deal with. And I'm hoping people like you would work on that, to some extent to do.
We've run out of time, but several things is I think your being here has re-stimulated us to look at what we're doing in this area. There's about 15 or 20 people across the campus who are doing major research in some aspect of human-computer interaction, from cognitive science to many, many other techniques. And one of the things we'd hope to be able to derive from the stimulation you've provided is a workshop somewhere in the next 6 or 8 months, and Maybe we look forward to getting you back again on a wonderful and beautiful day. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'll just take 30 seconds to wrap up here. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for our technical crew, Anthony, Kyle, David, G for helping our student assistants. They all put this together. Without them, we could not have done all of this technology to going out remotely and to assist with the seminar. So thank you very, very much. I look forward to you back here March 28th to hear a presentation by Dr. Brian Haynes from McMaster University. So thank you very much.
If anybody knows how to work the cycle, watch See Me After.